All right, we're live again. Let's hope this holds.
All right, technical difficulties. But all right, so David, one of the things that you know, when I look at your world and how interesting it must be, you're in North Carolina, you're in a very pro-gun state. You wear the liberal professor like I wear the ungun guy thing. What type is it harder to be a liberal amongst liberals that's pro-gun, or is it harder to be a liberal amongst pro-gun like you see what I'm saying? Like,
Yeah,
who gives you
yeah.
more crap? Like,
I think that there neither one is a very comfortable position to be in because there is within gun culture so much of an assumption that you do carry certain political views. But I definitely have always felt welcome in all the gun spaces that I've gone into. With a couple of exceptions. Um, and I think that's to the credit that people saw me as someone who was genuinely interested in what was going on, or as I became a gun owner, someone who was just interested in becoming a better gun owner. And so I thought it was fairly easy to bracket the politics of guns. If you just kind of let people know, like, hey, I don't need you to be bashing Sleepy Joe. I'm here to learn how to manipulate the trigger better. And little boundary setting works pretty well. In my everyday life, I think what really ends up happening is that I just kind of you know stay in the closet, so to speak. That people don't really talk to me about my research. I don't impose my research on other people. And I do sort of exist along the margins of the field of gun studies within the academy. So I feel like I definitely am play a more central role as a liberal in gun culture than I play as a gun owner in academia. And people, I think humor me, and they can't deny that the work that I do is legitimate sociology. It's just so far away from the dominant approach to studying guns, that I just kind of skirt along the margins, which is fine. For me, I'm more interested in kind of affecting the way that everyday people think and talk about guns than I am worried about how 50 sociologists think about guns.
yeah, I think that a lot of people in gun world, gun culture, miss the boat when we get. I'm going to use like the liberal gun club as an example, right? Or liberal gun owners. We have these group of people that feel the exact same way we do as a whole, like collective, about guns, and then we don't put these people forward or we don't lift them up because we can't get over the other issues. You know what I mean? I always tell people all the time, like I use my mom as an example. I brought her up on the show many times. She's liberal, but she's super pro gun. But that's not her hill to die on. The guns is not her hill to die on. Now she'll fight for you. She'll go to wherever you want and she'll sing those praises of being pro gun. But don't expect her to move off of her hill that she's going there for. And I think that we missed the boat when we kind of uh, use the NRA talking points because I really felt like the NRA did a really good job of doing the divide. And I know why they did it. You know what I mean?
Hmm.
It was money, so it's a shame. But one of the things you do that I think is really cool is you actually teach a class, right? We've talked about this when you've been on the show before, but I want to touch on that before we dive into the book. But why I think that's important is as firearms people, we are constantly, and no one can deny this, not the Facebook comment people right now that are probably saying rude things. Um, no one can deny that we always say if people took the time to learn and actually dive into firearms, then they would understand. And I use this kind of flex that I do on people when they start really like talking. Right? Because I get accused of being an anti-gun liberal commie. I think Kevin, I got called a commie the other day, and I said I am from New Jersey originally. So like I no, but going back to the whole people just react emotionally and they don't understand where you're coming from. Uh, but to me, my card that I like to drop at the very end is I'm like, yeah, I've almost armed like 1 million Americans, right? Because I was doing the math, right? He used to sell 60, 80,000 guns to civilians, and I've been in the firearms industry over 20 years.
Hmm.
If you actually total up what my family did, it's way more than 1 million. Um, you can literally look at somebody and be like, I've educated X amount of college age students. Like, how many people have you really educated, right? Like, what's that like? How, when you first started that course and you came up with the idea, and um yeah, I have a follow-up question. I'm going to wait to you. I want you
Yeah.
to answer the first part, but what was that like?
Yeah. Well, so the most distinctive part of the course, I think, and what people take most note of, at least, is that before we ever sit down in a classroom on campus, we take a field trip to the gun range, and every student is not required to, but given the opportunity to shoot a 22 pistol, a 9 millimeter pistol, and an AR platform rifle. And the reason why I decided to make that the very start of the class was because my own experience of shooting a gun was so profound. That I, again, 42 years of my life, never touched a gun. The first time I shot a gun wasn't because, like, oh, I really want to get into guns. It was like, man, everybody in North Carolina's got a gun. I better know how these things work, right? But then over the course of a box of 9 millimeter ammo, I got really interested, like the challenge of making the hole go in the paper where I wanted it to go. It's the same as playing golf or horseshoes or throwing darts. Like, it's a challenge, and you want to do better at it, and you can see the fun of it. So, not to have students have that exact same experience, but knowing how significant an experience like that could be under, very safe conditions, recognizing that the students can be nervous, that they should be nervous, right? But that you're going to walk them through, to have a good, safe experience. And that has really become a significant part of the course, because not that students completely change their mind. Like, if a student comes in, thinking AR-15s are terrible, they're going to shoot the AR-15 and think, wow, that's terrible. That's way, that's so much power. Nobody should have that. But what they can also at the same time recognize is, hey, I understand why someone else might like to do that, right? Or I can understand, I felt really powerful shooting that gun. I could see why someone might want to feel empowered like that. Or, a lot of these students are type AAA, they're just like, they want to make the hole in the middle of the paper, right? And so that challenge, leads them into the experience. So, it definitely is something that most of these students don't have any experience with firearms, and those who do generally just have a little bit. And so, they come out of that experience really understanding, why do guns make sense to people who own guns? Doesn't, again, change their fundamental political views, but by the end of the class, you see some softening of those edges, right? Like, hey, I'm still concerned about guns, but I need to work with gun owners, who have legitimate reasons to own firearms, right? Or people who are come out of, very gunny backgrounds, or like, I can understand why some of my peers who don't have experience with firearms would be concerned that any person who doesn't have a criminal record, isn't, prohibited person, can get these firearms. So really, softens edges and brings people towards the middle, which is where I generally want to see people going.
Yeah, do you ever get the kid though that like was super like pro gun, that was raised in like say North Carolina and like grew up their whole life, and it's almost like the person who like grew up in a Hispanic household and they spoke Spanish all day and they were taking Spanish 101. You
Yeah.
know what I mean? Like, you should not be in this class, sir. But like you get the person that like is super pro gun, and then they're kind of like helping you teach the course almost, where you're like, pump the brakes. I know what I'm doing here.
Yeah, I think not really, because you have to consider these are mostly 18 to 22-year-old kids. So we, are dealing with issues that kind of go beyond the experience of what most 18 to 22-year-olds, even if you grew up in a gun household, are thinking about like, the history of gun ownership, the legal frameworks of gun ownership, how concealed carry laws have changed over time, and what the meaning of that is. Or I oftentimes look at non-traditional gun owners, African Americans, sexual minority gun owners, women. So I think even someone who comes in thinking like, I'm Captain 2A and I know everything there is to know about guns, that person has a lot to learn also, if they're open-minded about it, right? And
Mm.
that's why I say, like, there are certain ways in which my book deals with things that many gun owners, already know about, like, what's like to concealed carry. Why does someone need 15 guns? Why does someone need an AR-15? But I try to bring this sort of different kind of perspective to the question, right? One that really incorporates that foot in both worlds kind of approach, which acknowledges that, for example, people are rightly concerned that civilians own AR-15s in the United States, because if you don't come from within gun culture, all you see are the negative things that people are doing with AR-15s. And we've talked before about this kind of reflexive defensive response of, from my cold dead hands, and keep your don't touch my AR-15s, or only 400 people are killed by rifles every year. You know, every one of us can throw out these kind of defenses, but I try to engage the issue in a non-defensive kind of way, right? And really saying like, hey, people have legitimate concerns. Let's address those concerns from a gun sympathetic perspective. And I know you do that as well. So this is not, telling you anything that you don't already do.
Yeah, absolutely. So you've written books before. You've published books before. Um, why this one? How did this come to be? Like, what was your light bulb moment for it?
Yeah, man. Well, so this was, this book was a long time coming. When I first got into the work, I was just thinking, hey, I'm a sociologist. I'm going to write an academic study of gun culture, fill a niche in the field like we all do. But maybe 6 years in, I start thinking, maybe there's something more than just talking to the 100 people who study guns in my field, right? That maybe I have something I can say to a broader population. Again, both gun owners and also people who are skeptical of guns and people who are curious about guns. So I started pivoting more toward figuring out how to write a book that would be something that any person would read, right? Not just other sociologists or other professors. And a really pivotal moment for me was when I spoke at the National Firearms Law Seminar in 2019, which exists right before the NRA annual meeting. It's like kind of gun lawyers learning more about gun law, but they also, they have a plated lunch. So they bring someone in to do like a little lunchtime talk. And, in my lunchtime talk, I really, for the first time, told my story. It was kind of a coming out moment of telling my story of becoming a gun owner and what I learned about gun culture in the process. And the talk was really well received. And so that kind of gave me confidence that I could tell a story that would be of interest to people. So I thought, perfect. Now I just have to find a publisher. To get a publisher, I need to find an agent. So all of these things take a really long time. I found an agent. The guy was like a superstar in his field of selling nonfiction. He's a classic, Brooklyn, publishing industry liberal. And he started shopping the book around, and we ended up getting 33 rejections. So I was 0 for 33 in him pitching
Wow.
this book, which I got to a point where I thought, I either have to completely rewrite the book, like I have to figure out what do publishers actually want, or maybe I have to self-publish the book, which has a lot of downsides. And then just out of nowhere, this woman contacted me on LinkedIn and said, "Hey, I'm an editor at this publisher in North Carolina. I'm a Wake Forest graduate in sociology. My kids went to Wake Forest. Are you writing a book?" And I said, "Well, as a matter of fact, I am." I said, "But before we go down this road, I really want to just sit down and tell you about the book, because I'm getting a lot of negative response to the book." And so we had lunch, and I said, I think that up in New York, there's a lot of liberal gatekeeping going on, that the book is not sufficiently critical of guns. Doesn't talk about how guns are ruining American society or, destroying democracy. And and she said, that's, I grew up in North Carolina. I'm a gun owner. My family's gun owners. This is not a problem. So, they ended up taking the book, and after this long, many year journey, the book is coming out on June 1st. But there were many moments along the way where it either could have been a very different book, or it could have not seen the light of day at all. So I'm that much more excited about the book coming out because it was such a struggle to make it happen.
Yeah. So in the book, you interview this model who's hit a wall.
Yeah.
Model, your everyday model turned gun dealer. What was that like?
All right.
For the
Well,
listeners, I am featured in the book, so
yes, yeah. So, well, yeah. I mean, let me just situate this in some context. So I say that this is really trying to make sense of, why do guns make sense to people who own them. So, I'll tell you what some of the chapters are. Right. So the first chapter is called "Guns Are Normal and Normal People Use Guns." This is a fundamental perspective I have. Becoming a gun super owner, talking about how is it that anybody could end up with, a bunch of guns, living with AR-15s, concealed carry revolution. But chapter 7 deals with guns as risk factors for negative outcomes, right? And I think this is something that we do have this reflexive response of like, oh no, it's not the guns, it's people. But I think that we need to recognize the fact that guns are lethal weapons. As Tom Given said, if they weren't lethal, they would be of no use to us. And that if you're going to have a lethal weapon in your home or on your person, that is going to introduce some level of risk, right? Nothing that can't be mitigated. But I think as gun owners really need to face head on this reality and then say, and what can we do to address that? Right. So, I deal with the issue of suicide, and I really, in my wanting to address the issue in a sort of positive way, in an unorthodox way, I really wanted to talk about Walk the Talk America, because I think this is you know one of the groups that's doing the most to kind of bridge divides, to go into areas like um, the Aspen Institute, and sit on a panel with people who come from a very different perspective, and not every person who is working in this space has the capacity to do that. But you know I was very happy to be able to include in the book this picture of Michael Sodini sitting on a panel in Aspen, which I think is really a feather in your cap, and a real recognition of your ability to speak across these divides in a way that's credible. Um, but I think that one of the things that, and this is me analyzing you to your face, right? But one of the things that allows you to do this, and I've alluded to this before, is your background of coming from outside of gun culture, right? Dealing with people who are different from you, handling diversity, negotiating situations in which people don't all agree, right? And it's not just your story of coming from San Francisco, right? But it's your story of fleeing New Jersey with your mom to Canada, to San Francisco, to Spain, right? And then even beyond that, if you spend some time looking into the background of Michael Sodini, you come across weird things like one of the most famous designers in recent history, maybe of all of history, Karl Lagerfeld, created a photo book, um, and the book is dedicated to Michael Sodini. I don't know if you can see that there. Right. So you can imagine me, just doing some background research, because I've come to Las Vegas. I'm going to interview Mike about his work with Walk the Talk America, but I want to find out more about the background. and you can read the book, you get a lot more of the background here. Um, but we're talking about someone who one of the most famous designers in all of history decided to do a picture book and featured one subject in all of the pictures and dedicated the book to him. And so again, this is obviously part of your background, but again, I think the relevance of it is if you are in situations where you are on somebody's estate in France, that is requires you to be able to deal with diverse situations and diverse people. And I'm sure that that's just a moment, right? Because you're traveling the world, you're in major cities through the world, dealing with people who are come from all sorts of different backgrounds, right? And I feel like the work that you're doing is a great sort of extension of that, right? Because you are taking what you know from your experience working in the firearms industry, but also dealing with situations of diversity, trying to figure out, how can we negotiate this? How can we find a common ground? How can we make things better, right? Despite the fact that we disagree with each other. So, I appreciate the time that you took to sit down with me and the openness that you talked about your background. There's a lot more in the book than just that, but I put those things in there not just because they're interesting. They are interesting, but also because it's what, in my view, allows you to do what you do today.
No,
Tell
David,
I
me if
was
I'm
there
appreciate
wrong.
that.
Correct me if I'm wrong.
No, I appreciate that.
David, was there a percentage of you that thought Mike's story was just bullshit, kind of, and you didn't believe that all of it actually tied together? Mike has told me kind of everything he told you in multiple hour conversations, but was there a piece of you that was like, well, let me see if this is actually legitimate?
Well, I I feel like I have the receipts, that if you're going to talk about I worked as a model and I did these things, and I can find several books in which you're featured. I think that the proof is right there. And so even if some of the stories may have been exaggerated, right? I think the underlying idea is still there, and it's how do we deal with diversity? That's one of the challenges we have as a country, and I think that the more different kinds of experiences that people have, the easier it becomes. And when we're talking about how do we address the fact that people in America see guns in very different ways, that's a challenge of dealing with diversity, right? And people who come from backgrounds like Mike's, are better able to deal with diversity like that. Um, but there's just so many great stories there about his mom. His mom makes an appearance in there, and so I hope, like, even if you don't care at all about Walk the Talk America and you think Mike's a communist, then this is probably give you some more evidence and for why Mike is a communist.
That's right. It's really interesting because a couple things. When we met, I already considered you a friend. Like, we had a rapport, so like it was easy to talk to you when we were in Vegas and you were doing the interview. And I remember that day, like, leaving the interview, and someone asked me, like, how did that go? And I was like, good. But it just, I look at my life and I'm always like, it seems so unbelievable, right? And not the modeling thing, like it's more or less like you're one of the first people I've publicly told the story of my biological father, right? And my father has he had a crazy life, and there's a history there that's really interesting. But I'm so glad that I did that, because I remember thinking, like, is this going to be relevant or whatever? Like, you look at these things and nobody thinks their life is really interesting in terms of, like, when they're telling other people about it. But um, I love that it's documented now. And I remember, like, telling my mom, like, hey, we have some documentation of this, like our version of it. Right. Because like you said, there's always exaggerations. I always say to people, there's three sides to every story. And I believe there's three sides to every story in gun culture. You know, there's
Mhm.
the pro, there's the anti, and then there's the nuance and all the stuff in the middle, right? And it's the same thing with my history, right? My father has a completely different history if you were to interview him than what I was telling you. Um, but I'm really thankful for the opportunity, and I feel like it's now documented. And I know that it must have been impactful because I had somebody that you let have an advanced copy of the book, and they came to me at Shot Show and they were like, dude, I didn't even like know that, like that part was crazy. You know what I mean? Like they had heard about the modeling stuff, right? Because like
Sure.
everybody knows that I've been in the industry for a long time, but and the modeling stuff has crept up. Like people have made jokes and gotten T-shirts and like things like that. But that part of my history nobody really knew. And when they read that, they were really like, wow, like that's insane, right? So I just want to thank you for giving me the platform to kind of document it. And I look at it like it's something that my daughter's kids one day will at least be able to point to and say like, all right, grandpa's history is in here. It's documented. He talked about it. It's really kind of cool. So thank you for that.
Yeah, man. I mean, obviously, like we knew each other in advance, and I'd appreciated the time we spent. I didn't have any idea of how far that interview was going to go, and I think I set aside an hour. We might have talked for two and a half, and but and whether it's you or anybody else I've ever observed or spoken to in the process of doing this research on gun culture, I've always felt an obligation to tell their story honestly. And so if you read what I wrote and you think that's the honest story of me, and that I didn't take liberty in it, I didn't bend it for my own purposes, then that I feel like that's repaying the trust that you and other people have given me in allowing me to peer into their lives. Because honestly, and again, most people don't stand to gain from having a sociologist come around asking them questions. And so, again, you entrusted me with a lot of very personal information, and hopefully that I repaid that trust by accurately conveying it. And also, I think hopefully for readers, it's not just a matter of, like, oh my God, I can't believe that that's his life, but also, again, the reason I use those stories is because I honestly believe that you are doing the work that you're doing for a reason, right? Your own personal motivations, but you're positioned to do it because of all of those things in your background, right? And so I think that's an important part of the story, and it's something that people can learn from. Not everybody can have all of those experiences, but we can try to put ourselves in situations where we are dealing with people who are different from us, and manage our emotions in those situations and try to figure out how can we move forward together from our different positions. And that's something that I think if all of us did that more, pro gun, anti gun, right, that we would be, again, we wouldn't all agree, but the way we disagree would be so much better, and we could find areas of agreement that we could move forward on, which is, I think, exactly what you're doing, right? You're saying, hey, I come from the gun side. What can I do to make things better in collaboration with people who I might disagree with on other things, right? You're willing to take opportunities to work with people in the areas that they agree with you, and doing good work because of it.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. I truly wish the industry and the culture, it's like we always put ourselves in this negative space, right? Like, oh, no one gives us a fair shake, everybody judges us. And yeah, like a lot of that's true, but like it's wild. Like I tell the story all the time of being in Aspen, right? And I got warned by so many people. Like they were so afraid for me. Like they were, they didn't want me to go up and just get crushed up there. Like, and I remember like the one lady said to me, she's like, "You're super confident," and I was just like, "Yeah, this is easy to me." Like my crowd is actually tougher to talk in front of because they don't give you a lot of time, and they jump to conclusions really fast. So if they hear mental health and firearms, it's an automatic negative thing, right? Where
Mm-hmm.
I was like, okay, I'm going to go up there and give some solutions, some talk about some of the things that they have no clue about, right? Like some of the companies that are really stepping forward and trying to be leaders in this space. and it's going to be different. And I knew it was going to be different, but really the proof of that was walking around the campus the next 2 days, right? Because I only spoke one night. I had one event. And then the rest of the time they were like, just hang out and, attend all the events that were happening. And there were so many people and that just wanted to stop me. And they were just like, hey, I saw you speak the other day at that event, and I'm anti-gun, I hate guns, but like you gave me something to think about. I appreciate you, right? Like that was 9 out of 10 people. You know what I mean? And that 10th person didn't even stop to talk to me. I'm sure if they were just like, yeah, whatever, right? Like, but the love and the support and just like people getting behind what I was saying, that's what I wish the industry understood a little bit more. Like it is very possible to go in these spaces. So I guess I have a question too. Before you met me and you heard like who turned you on to Walk the Talk America, and who turned you on to what we were doing and what we were up to, and what was that experience like when you were kind of diving in, like, okay, what are these people doing? And I'm sure you looked at it like, uh this looks really good, I like what they're saying, but where's the you know when
Right.
does it derail, right? Because I'm sure a
Right.
lot of people look at that.
Yeah, I think what one thing we see is that, a lot of people start organizations and then their organizations never gain a foothold and then they kind of go away. So, I think that, when I'm sh- I can't say for certain, but I'm very confident that I learned about Walk the Talk through Rob Pincus. In my sociology of guns class, Rob's visited not every year, but as many years as anybody else has visited, and I usually have him come in and talk about something related to kind of gun rights and gun responsibilities, and then sometimes that'll overlap with questions of negative outcomes and especially suicide. So I remember him highlighting some of the early work, some talks that he gave, and I think you gave, to mental health professionals in the kind of very early days. And so, I think that's how the group came on to my radar. And I thought, again, if you go to any group of sort of normal human beings and you say, who's in favor of more suicide? Anybody? Right? Nobody is in favor of more suicide. So this is a huge common ground that people have regardless of your orientation to guns. And so the fact that there was a group that sort of came out of the gun community that was saying, hey, maybe we need to do something to address concerns about mental health, and that might help to address the issue of suicide. I thought that, that was perfect, very much in line with the way I thought. And, for whatever idiosyncrasies he has, I tend to agree with Rob on a lot of things in terms of, gun culture and gun politics. So I remember sitting in on probably the first cultural competency webinar that Jake and Rob put on for mental health professionals to familiarize themselves with firearms. And so I've been following the work pretty closely, but always wondering, like, it's so it's easy to start organizations, it's easy for organizations to fail. So there was always that question of, is this going to gain a foothold? Is it going to have a life? Or in again, this come I talk about this in the book. There were certainly moments when it would have been very easy for you to just walk away, and that you made some pretty significant personal sacrifices to keep it going, which made me respect the work that much more. And again, trying to support it as much as I can, just in terms of talking about it as much as I can. So yeah, that's I've been a follower and a fan for a long time.
I appreciate that. So obviously, when you're putting this together, and you're like, I'm gonna do another book, right? Which most people, if they get through book one, they make book, they write book one. They're not, my whole thing is like, what are the odds you're going to write another one? Most likely, you're going to like breathe and be like, oh my god, I'm never doing that again. Uh, how do you tie this all together? I want to talk about like with a process. Like you're talking about gun culture. There's a lot to talk about, but you also got to pick certain groups or aspects that you want to highlight? You got to highlight positive and you got to highlight negative. You got to lean into negative, right? Like how is the process?
I mean, it takes a long time to figure out, the right way to structure the book. On the one hand, people say like, how do you write a book? And I say like one sentence at a time, right? So you're constantly going through this process of crafting sentences, but then going back to the big picture. And I have a complete book proposal that I finished in 2016. It bears very little resemblance to this book that's coming out. I have two other books completely outlined that I could write if I, find that I have time and interest, that, again, have some overlap with this book, but really take the work in different directions. So, it's really a process of sifting and winnowing, right? And there's a important sense in which the most important part of writing is the editing, so figuring out what can't be in there. And I accumulated so many debts to people in the course of doing all this work, but I have one chapter, for example, on the training industry. And so there's so many people I learned from in the training industry that don't get mentioned in the book. And so, but that was really hard because my goal was like, everybody who helped me at some point is going in the book somewhere. But that doesn't make for a good book. So the process of sifting, winnowing, editing, and figuring out, what's a logical progression of chapters. That was probably the biggest part. And I feel like there's more that could be said. I think the book is a couple hundred pages long, so you can imagine how much ended up on the cutting room floor. But maybe you don't have to imagine too much. If I see one photo of Michael Sodini in a book, how many photos were taken to get that one photo, right? I mean, hundreds,
Right.
right? And so
Right.
that's a big part of the process is of the this is 75,000 words. I've probably written 300,000 words to get to those 75,000 words.
So expectation level of this book, like who if I'm in the store and I see it, right? Like what how do you hope people take it? Right? Because like I said, you come out swinging. I mean, when you just say liberal professor, you're going to blow people's minds, right?
Right.
And a lot of people are going to jump to a conclusion. Um, like for you, like I guess who did you write that? Who are you writing it for? Like, what are you trying to? What's the main audience you're trying to grab?
Yeah. Well, I like to think that if you're a gun enthusiast, that you read it and you say, hey, this person really understands why guns make sense. And so that was kind of a baseline. Like the people that I'm actually studying need to be able to read the book and say, that's right. And maybe even I've learned something that's pushed me beyond what I already know. And then, I don't know that they will read it, but I really hope that, people who are skeptics of guns will take some time to consider why it is that some people see guns so very different than them. Now that's a big ask because people don't tend to like to read things that disagree with their own beliefs, but I try to adopt a tone that's welcoming, right? And to say like, hey, maybe even I'm one of you, like I'm a liberal, right? Or I'm a professor, like I come from the same cultural background as you, and yet guns now make sense to me in a way that they never did. Maybe I can help you see why. And then, again, the gun curious people who, there's a lot of people, we tend, if you're in this world, you tend to think that you're either with us or you're against us, right? But there's a whole bunch of people out there who, they just don't understand guns. They are curious about them. They're concerned about them. They're fascinated by them. So if I can find some way to get the book in the hands of those people, that would be amazing because I think it gives a very fair representation of what responsible gun ownership means. And if they're trying to imagine what that looks like, because they're completely outside of gun culture like I was, that they can see themselves maybe in that story. But again, I should just show like when the publisher first gave me this book design, like I liked the, the prominence of the gun curious, because hopefully visually, if someone is just walking around, it's not like yay guns or boo guns. It's like, hey, guns, like what's up with that? But this graphic that they first put on the book was a 1911 with just a standard flag, stars and stripes. And I said that doesn't really capture the tone of the book. Like, for one, like, this isn't 1911, right? We're talking about 2024. So I said you have to have a modern pistol as the underlying image. And then I also said, can we substitute question marks for the stars? Because it's not just let's wrap a guns in the flag, and yell freedom. It's like, hey, let's think about guns. Let's think about what I call the paradox of guns, right? Guns really have a paradoxical existence in America, which is that for the vast majority of guns and gun owners, guns are not problematic. For a minority of guns and gun owners, they're very problematic, right? And let's talk about both. It's not an either or thing, but some people only want to focus on yay guns, and some people only want to focus on boo guns. And the reality is much more complicated. So that's where the curiosity comes in. You have to want to know more. And I don't know whether there's an audience for the book. Like, I hope there is, but it may simply be that all of those New York City editors that passed on the book, 33 of them, were right. They're like, there's no audience for a book that doesn't either like say the guns are going to save democracy or guns are going to ruin democracy.
How about the promotion of the book then? Obviously we're going to promote the hell out of it. I'm going to recommend it to everybody, not even if I wasn't in it, just because I know who you are as a human, right? And for the listeners, just David is not somebody who holds his tongue. Like, I remember, I'm going to bring up the example of when we were doing our survey, right? And and out of Aspen, I came out and I was like, people use these crazy statistics and they use them against gun people, and I kind of want to get a poll of my own people, right? And I remember you were pretty critical of it because of the way we were doing it, and once again, we don't know anything about doing that, so like we were like, okay, teach us, David, or and I remember you said something like, if you ever want to do this correctly, like, and I have time, because you were in the midst of writing the book, right? But like, you weren't afraid to like call us out on it, which I appreciate that. I appreciate, someone saying like, this is no better than what they do if you're doing it like this. Right. But do you, in your line of work and the things you do, I assume you have some pretty thick skin, right? And you like the truth, and you're a researcher, and, you put it out there. How do you deal with that? How do you deal with kind of just knowing that there's going to be negative things said about this book, and people are like, we're going to be like, hey, did you read it? What did you take away from it? And they're like, oh, I didn't read that. I wouldn't read that liberal crap. You know what
Right.
I
Yeah. I think that there are justifiable criticisms of sort of ideological homogeneity within the university. Like I said, almost all social scientists are liberals, Democrats, or even more liberal than that. But within that, the process of putting ideas out and having people critique your ideas is a part of the scholarly process, right? So, if you can't take critique, you probably don't last very long, in scholarship. And so, I obviously think what I'm saying is correct, and I hope people see the correctness of it, but I don't imagine myself to be perfect. And there are probably things that I either have blind spots to, or that I haven't fully thought through. And so I'm hopeful that people do engage with the work, whether positively or critically, because that's the only way that we can move forward with things, right? And in my world, and this is when I brought forward my concerns about your survey. In my world, your ideas are one of the most valuable resources you have, right? And you only have a certain amount of time and energy So I'm not going to waste my time criticizing things that I don't care about, right? I see terrible stuff done all the time that I don't bother saying anything about, but I'm like, hey, I really want to support you in the work you're doing. I want you to do the best work possible. And that's why I bothered, taking the time, hopefully respectfully, to mention the concerns that I had. Like, if I didn't care about you guys, I wouldn't have bothered to say it. So, if people take time to criticize my work, it hurts, it can sting. Obviously, I'm a human being, but I also recognize, like, wow, that person took some of their time that they could have been doing a lot of other things, and they engaged with my ideas, and they offered their perspective. And I criticize colleagues all the time, on my blog and in writing and in reviews, and hopefully we don't see each other as enemies because of it. We see as people who see things differently and are trying to work more towards truth.
Yeah. Is there anything that you uncovered while writing this book that really shocked you? I mean, obviously, like, there's certain stories and aspects of people that you can uncover, like, oh, I didn't know that, but I'm talking about, is there anything, in the process where you're like, I've never really looked at guns this way, or now I'm seeing a totally different side of something?
I mean, I think because everything that I got involved in with guns was new to me. Like, everything I did was this moment of insight, and I'm really glad that I started blogging very early on, because it almost became like my diaries of what I was experiencing in real time, and I was really able to kind of draw on a lot of that material when I was piecing the book together. Um, but you take something like, I get invited to go do a two-man rifle shoot house class, and I'm thinking, like, okay, I'm an average civilian concealed carrier. What on earth do I need to be going to do, a two-man class on how to clear a house with a rifle, or a structure with a rifle? um, but even with that, I was able to realize, like, okay, I'm never going to be doing that, but there are things that I can learn for my everyday life that are useful about decision making, about how decision making can go bad, about how it's important to use our words and not just use our guns. And so, even situations that might seem patently ridiculous for people to be doing, I could come away with those with some insights about what's the usefulness of that. And I generally try to see what's the usefulness of things, as opposed to saying, like, that's just dumb and wrong.
Yeah. What type of promotion do you have in the works for this? I know you've been promoting it, obviously we're doing it through social media and things like that, but what is the promotion of this book look like? And, I guess my thing with the course you teach at the campus, like, what's the reception you've gotten from some of the people outside of gun world?
Yeah. Well, the reality is that even with big publishers, most authors are responsible for promoting their own work. And my publisher is a small publisher. This is the 34th publisher that I was working with. So I am largely the marketing team. I'm my own publicist. I don't really know how to do these things very well, and so really word of mouth is going to be the way that a lot of books are going to get sold, right? Not, you know, if you're trying to figure out what's the next book I'm going to read, or what do I need to look at that I don't know about, if someone you know and trust says, "Hey, check out this book," that means a lot more than something that I might post on Instagram. So, anybody who's listening, if you want to help, get the book out, and really just explain to people why it might be useful for them to pick it up. And I will get out. I'll be at the NRA annual meeting, sort of doing booth appearances, and selling some pre-publication copies. But really, I think word of mouth is king in terms of how people discover and decide to buy books.
Yeah, do you find it's easier to, because you've done, I know for a fact that you've appeared on podcasts and other media outlets where I didn't even know you were on that, and then I was listening to that person's podcast or um, segments about the firearms industry, and then all of a sudden they're like David Yamane, and I'm like, oh my god, David, right? Like, is it easier to get with the liberal side of things, like the liberal media that they, that we always talk about, or do you find more acceptance inside sort of the echo chamber of gun culture?
Yeah, I mean, and that was, I think, to your other question is, how's the book being received outside of gun culture? Um, I think, I have so many connections within gun culture, given the nature of my work, that it's easier for me to get on podcasts with people who are within the gun culture. I have a huge list of people who are outside of the gun culture, which I'm, you know, contacting and letting them know the book is coming out. And I'd be happy, like I want to be on, Fresh Air with Terry Gross and 1A on NPR and the Brian Lehrer show, that those are really an opportunity to reach the audiences who don't know about this side of gun culture. But those are big asks in general, right? Not anybody gets on Terry Gross, but at the same time, there's also a strong bias against guns among these same people. So if my selling point is, if you want to understand why guns make sense to gun owners better, then let's talk. If they don't want to understand that, then they don't want to talk to me, right? And for, I think, a lot of liberals, it's fingers in the ears, la 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 la. I don't care why gun owners have guns. I just know that guns are bad. So um, I've had an opportunity to be on, like, Chuck Todd's uh, podcast from Meet the Press. He's very liberal, but he was very open minded in talking to me. But I think those opportunities are fewer and more far between. But I'm working on it. If I had a really good publicist, it would be a lot easier, because a lot of those shows only book people through publicists, and if you're just a regular person, it gets pretty hard to get on. So the
Yeah.
general difficulty plus the liberal gatekeeping, I think, makes it a challenge. But again, I think, if how people sometimes say, how can I help you? Like, if there's a morning radio show in your area that a lot of people listen to that deal with current events, let me know who that person is. I'm happy to contact them. If being on, a big radio station one morning in Charlotte is, not inconsequential. And there's, a lot of people who are trying to fill content that I just don't know about.
Yeah, I mean, in my world, like, you're the perfect guest to have on to have a nuanced discussion about firearms. And like I said, just because you're a unicorn, right? We addressed that earlier, and that's not supposed to exist. And I think that just blows people's minds when they're like, wait a minute, everything is turned upside down now because I hear the word liberal, and I just automatically am jumping to the conclusion, and they're the enemy. Like, it's that thing. If you had one, like, if you had a room full of Democrats, right, and they were allowing you to have this kind of nuanced conversation without getting emotional, right? Like I guess I don't know. This is a horrible question, because it's like when people say, "How do you stop suicide?" Right? But like, how do you approach that when you talk to, like, the person who's just so dug in, so emotional? And they have every right to be emotional, right? Let's face it, like, nobody wants to see people die, and that's really what is at the root of the emotion. Unless you're
Mm-hmm.
like a politician who knows they're pandering to a certain, and you're kind of heartless and you don't care. But everybody else,
Right.
I found that, like, the moms demand action ladies, like, every time I've sat with them and stuff like that, like, I feel their pain. Like, I mean, I'm a suicide loss survivor myself, right? I've lost dear friends to suicide by firearm. So, like, when they're telling me their stories, I relate to that, and I totally feel it. I feel it. Like, how do you, like, what's your mind frame? That process. What's that like?
Yeah. I really try to do this work of mediation, and to try to, when I say drawing people to the middle, I just sort of mean more in the sense of releasing that tension that comes from people pulling in opposite directions. And I wish I had a sample of it here, but Randy Mion from the Liberal Gun Owners, talks about those. We used to call them Chinese finger traps. I don't know that we're allowed to call them Chinese finger traps anymore, but those finger traps. You put your finger in either end, and you pull, and you get stuck, right? And the only way that you can get unstuck is by releasing the tension, right? And I think that's a great image for where we're at in our gun debates today, which is that you've got people on either side that they're just pulling, and we're stuck because people are pulling in opposite directions. So if I ever have an opportunity, whether I'm talking to gun people or talking to sort of non-gun people, Democrats, liberals, gun violence prevention advocates, I say like, hey, what would happen if we said not where do we differ, but what do we have in common, right? Move toward each other, release that tension, and then have a conversation, right? And it's a frustration of my wife and close friends are like, well, what's your solution? And I'm like, I don't have a solution. If I had a solution, I would give the solution, take my Nobel Prize, and just call it a day. Nobody has the solution, right? But what we have is the opportunity to talk to each other and to build on each other's ideas to work toward better solutions, as opposed to just pulling away from each other and not making any progress at all, right? So if I have an opportunity to speak to people, both in the tone that I use, the respectfulness, the empathy, right, as well as in the content, it's always about releasing the tension, right? Not ignoring the benefits of guns, not ignoring, the negative outcomes with guns, but talking about both of those things in this context of released tension, where we're moving toward each other, towards what we have in common, as opposed to what we're constantly doing, which is just pulling away from each other and getting stuck.
Have you ever had an experience where you're just like, I have to get out of this conversation? Like this person is just too fired up, whether it's a pro gun person or an anti gun person. Like, have you ever been in that situation where you're just like, damn, like I can't, like this is getting uncomfortable.
I mean, the honestly, the experience I have that are most like that are ones that are online, right? Where it's easy just to say, I'm blocking you, or I'm not going to respond to this thread or whatever. When I talk to people face to face, I find the conversations to be largely civil, right? And again, this is, I think, one of those things where so much of our conversations about guns and our debates and discussions about guns are on these platforms, which are totally ill-suited to making progress, right? So it's not easy to talk to people who are different from you face to face. It takes a lot of time, or you have to have the right occasion, right? But I find that when I talk to people face to face, some of those rough edges come off, right? You have to literally look at someone, like you said, you're looking at someone who's involved in a gun violence prevention movement because they've suffered a loss or they're concerned about loss. I mean, do you find yourself in conversations where you have to break out?
I think about sometimes. No.
Hey, I have to say, just let me. I'll let you answer, but I am a little bit concerned about how things are going to go when I show up at the NRA annual meeting to talk to people at booths about my book, because I may get into situations where I'm like, whoa, buddy, I'm sorry, I'm not American enough for you. Like, don't buy my book if you don't like it, right? So sorry,
Yeah.
Mike.
Yeah. I remember one instance. I think Rob had the 2A rally in Washington, D.C. That was the first time I ever got really punched in the face. And when I say punched in the face, it didn't physically happen to me, but I got punched in the face by my own people. And I remember like going on stage, and I made the mistake because I was super confident at that time, because I was just coming off of the White House. Like I was at the White House, and I was just like, everybody loves Walk the Talk America. Da, 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 da. I never really thought that my own people could hit me with the right cross, right? Like, and then I remember I got up there and I had a whole speech planned, and I remember I said something like guns and mental health, and I lost the crowd immediately because somebody yelled out, "Stop blaming the gun!" Right, and then the crowd heard that, And I remember coming off the stage and I looked at Rob. I go, "That's the last time I'm talking in front of our people." And but I was shook. You know what I mean? Because it was just such a misunderstanding, and I ended up getting the crowd back. But I remember I was like, I have to jump to a part of my speech that I didn't want to jump to. And I cut out so much of my speech that I felt was important because you only had
Mm,
5 minutes, right?
right.
But I had to get to a part where I started to almost do the talking point things. But like I could see where your concern would be at the NRA show, and when I say concerned, let's like no, it's either going to be some blowhard that's going to say something silly, right? Like it's no one at that show gets violent. Nobody fights, don't break out, things like that.
Hmm.
But like I could totally see where you're coming from, where people are going to see, especially the title of the book, right? And they might just go, "Well, let me tell you what the problem is," right? You're like, listen, man, like I address those things in the book. Like, you're going to have these moments where you could just be like, you should check out the book. Right.
Yeah.
But like, I do see where there could be a little concern because it's just like, it's not even a concern of fear. It's just more of a concern of like the eye roll thing where you're kind of like, I'm on your side. You know what I mean? Like, that's the toughest part when people that are like on your side are coming after you because they're not taking a moment to pause and breathe and digest what you're doing. And Kevin, thank God I have Kevin because like he's become a mini therapist for me many times where I've had to call and like it's like Kevin will be like, stay out of the comment section. And I'm like, I can't. I
Don't
can't.
read the
I gotta
comments. That's basic.
Yeah, I'm so impressed with people's ability to move past a comment in the comment section. That's absurd. You know what I mean? Like I just don't have it. So I can't go there. And we had a guy the other day. Being that we're talking about the book, he posted a link of some anti-liberal professor and compared him to you.
Oh, I
And
didn't see that.
yeah, and so I couldn't stay quiet because I was like, no, I'm not going to let this guy say something, right? Like say something that's completely untrue. And I was like, I don't understand why you're comparing the two. One is anti-gun and the other one is pro-gun. Like they couldn't be further from each other in this topic. And actually, to the guy's credit, he said I overreacted. Like I kind of
Well, there you go. That's
hell
good.
froze over. There was a moment like the frogs were falling out of the sky. You know what
Yeah.
I mean? Like, but like it was pretty wild. And I just assume that, I look at these situations and I know I'm equipped for them, right? Because I know like I'm like, okay, I've been punched in my face by my people the hardest, right? So I already know how to deal with my people. And I meant that earlier when I said I'm so comfortable talking in front of anti or gun neutral groups that it's weird. It's like I know it's going to go well because it's a formula. It's like batting practice, right? But you know, my side, our side, the gun side can be a little tricky sometimes because we have quick triggers when it comes to, you know, our rights and what people think and I get it. Like some of it is some of it's warranted, right? Like I remember, I tell the story over and over again, but I remember the first time, like I realized, wow, people can hate me just because I sell firearms legally. I always thought like your hate would come from somebody who's selling firearms illegally and
Right.
like
Right.
contributing to that thing. Like I never realized. And I remember the first time a person had a negative reaction to me and kind of basically called me a baby killer and told me I was standing on graves. And I was like, no, 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 I sell them legally. Like that's how naive I was.
Yeah.
That girl was like, I don't care. Like you suck. So
Yeah.
I can see your point.
I mean,
I feel for
one of the people who reviewed my book basically said that the book was built on the dead bodies of children, and I was like, wow, okay. I mean, not my audience, but it's a good reminder that those views are out there, and also I've had comments on my social media like why would I want liberals to own guns? They're the enemy, and so but I try to ignore like the people who are on the 10-yard line on either side and look at the people who are in the 80 yard lines within the middle of the field. At the same time, I do have a fairly highly curated both experience of gun culture and also for kind of audience. I'm not, what I do is never gonna, have a million followers on YouTube or social media. But for people who want the kind of approach that I take, who want someone who doesn't raise his voice, who tries to see both sides, who tries to find the nuance. Nuance doesn't sell very well, but if for people who do want that, that's what I got.
Yeah, I feel for you, David. We have trouble linking to maybe a new resource that's just a landing page on our website, and people won't even take the 2, 3 minutes to go read that. And you're working with a book that's whatever you said, 35,000 words, and would take a lot to digest. And people just don't give it the time of the day. And the cover is funny too. Everybody sees liberal professor and has negative reactions, but Mike has experiences where somebody will ask, "Oh, can you get this board member or connection of yours to speak at this maybe very Republican event?" And Mike's like, no, that wouldn't be a good fit. He's actually liberal," and people just have no idea. They just jump to assumptions.
Yeah. And I talk a lot about the kind of bias that the New York City publishing industry has against guns. But at the same time, they want to sell books, right? So I have to think that that there are some of them who are really just saying, can we sell a book that tells this particular story about guns? And some of them I think legitimately said like gun books don't sell well, right? It's sort of like, a friend of mine who thought he moved from the Northeast down to North Carolina. He's like, I'm going to publish a series of biographies of NASCAR drivers, right? And he tried to sell the idea, and the person was like, guess what? People who follow NASCAR don't buy books. And, I'm not in the industry. So, but, I trust the people in the industry who want to sell books. And if they say that, gun people don't buy books or don't buy books that aren't like, how to break down your Glock or, whatever, that there may be some insight there. So again, I don't know who is going to buy the book, if anybody. I do hope that they're wrong about people within the gun community not buying books, because you know one of the things that can make work like this more possible is if this book does well, right? And so if I have another a follow up book, or if there's another person out there who wants to write a book that's serious about guns and not, talking about how guns are terrible, then if there's a track record of previous books doing well, that will be helpful. So, books, you can buy books and not read them too. I think I've got many books that I've purchased that have never been opened. So don't feel obligated to read the book just because you bought it. Just buy the
Yeah.
book.
So buy the book, right? Support the book. It's important to support the book, and I'm gonna reach out to the listeners right now. And I know some of the listeners, guys like Ghost, Tactical, Clover's always on here. Like you guys have platforms. Give this man, if you haven't had him on the show, give him an opportunity to come on, um, because I think it's important. And I've said this over and over again. We have to take, and when I say we, I don't want people to make an assumption about me, right? I'm talking about gun culture. We have to take the people. We've politicized this thing so much that it's become like a Crip and blood thing, right? Like it's liberals versus libertarians and right wing conservatives. But I think we gotta take the people that have our same love for firearms and our the love for being able to defend yourself and just the culture, and we got to get out of the echo chamber, right? Because David, and I'm going to talk about you like you're not here, right? But like David is it to me just like everybody I know in the liberal gun club. Like there are so many times when I have the opportunity to have a meeting, and I say to the person, do you mind if I invite this other person into the meeting? Because I need you to hear from them as well. And I know exactly what I'm doing, right? Because there are certain people you can put forward in a room that are going to speak to those people. And then there's others where you say, I got to find somebody that's different, that's going to blow people's minds, right? Like, because they don't need to hear it from me. They don't need to hear it from the middle-aged white guy, that everyone has this stereotype of a gun guy, right? That's why I go with the ungun gun guy thing. But like, we got to push the people forward that can help have a conversation about this stuff. Because if we put the wrong people forward, we're not even, the door's not going to get open. You know what I'm saying? Like,
Mhm.
as soon as the Biden administration came into power, I said, in my world, this is where the liberal gun club gets pushed to the forefront, right? Like, okay, like, it's going to be a fight and we're not going to agree, but let's put the people that have the ability to get the meetings to sit down, like the Lara Smiths, right? Like Ed, right, from Liberal Gun Club, the Randy, right, from Liberal Gun Owners. Like, these are the people that we should push forward to say, like, we need to have them on the Hill. We need to have them at all the meetings, because they're now our voice of reason. Uh, I, I hate to say it, but people are going to respect their own. Like, that's what it is. So I think if you have a show, if you have a platform, if you know somebody that can help promote this book, do it, please. I'm asking you, not just because David and I are friends, but that I'm telling you that this is how we move forward, right? And we don't know what's going to happen in the election. And let's face it, people act like Trump is a savior for firearms. Trump did a lot of negative things for firearms that we kind of just breeze over. It doesn't matter who's in charge next. This fight's still going to happen. These things are going to happen. So we need to come together, put the right people in the right places, and moving forward. So once again, I'm telling anybody who's listening that has a platform or knows somebody, like, push this man's message out. This book, it needs to be out there. I find it fascinating that you said that many, publishers said that books about guns don't sell. Like, I never would have guessed that. I would have thought that it's something that's emotional, so it would sell. But that's really interesting. So yeah, we got to promote it more. But
Yeah.
uh,
And, again, disagree with me. Like, I don't presume to have the truth of everything. But take some time to consider the ideas and see where you agree and where you disagree. And if you disagree, I'd love to hear it, because that's how I'm going to grow in my understanding of, of things, and that there's not a single right answer to every question. It's really, about how do we deal with where we disagree.
yeah, 100%. Now I know we're up against it. I could talk to you all day. I mean, I just love talking to you. I really appreciate you. Like I said, to me, there's a few people that are just a breath of fresh air in this industry, and to me, you're one of those people. I thank you for coming on. How do people get this book? Like, let's talk about how people can get in touch with you.
Yeah. So, I think if you want to find out a lot of information about the book, if you just go to guncurious.com, that's my kind of landing page for all information about the book. From there, you can, sign up to be on my email list and get information in advance and opportunities for, little giveaways and other things like that. And, we all know that our social media presences are being throttled back if we do anything with guns. And so I think going forward, the best way for me to really be in touch with people in a permanent way is through my email list. So, sign up for the email list. And if you want to buy the book, you can buy it on Amazon as a paperback or a Kindle edition. Right now, it's also on barnesandnoble.com and other online sites. The book will be available in June. So you could go, it's not likely to end up in your local bookstore. So if you just walk into your bookstore, don't expect to see it there. But you can certainly go into your local bookstore and ask them to order a copy. Maybe then they'll order two copies, right? And so, however you prefer to get your books, you'll be able to get it that way. If you do purchase it in advance from Amazon, for example, that helps to feed the algorithm. So when the book does come out, Amazon may do some things to push that book into other people's feeds. So, guncurious.com for info. Order the book however you typically order books. If you want to order it in advance, there's some advantage to ordering it in advance.
That's great. Yeah, like I said, get out there, support this man, support his book. Um, let's get the word out as much as we can. We got to wrap up. I thank you for coming on, sir. It's always a pleasure. I wish I was going to be at the NRA show this year. Unfortunately, I gotta be a good dad. I I double booked myself. I actually got like my ticket and I got my hotel
Oh
room and all
no.
that stuff. And then all of a sudden, my wife was like, "What about your daughter's graduation?" And I'm like,
Oh
"No." Yeah. And I
yeah.
was just like, "Well, maybe I can fly back out." And no,
Nope. No,
so,
that's a
uh,
hard no, I think.
yeah. So this is going to be the first NRA show that I've missed. But if any of the listeners are going to be there, where are you going to be at the NRA show? Like, what
Yeah.
do you have any
So
booth appearances?
yep. So Friday, I'll be at the National Firearms Law Seminar, which is at the Hyatt Regency. So I'll be talking from 12 to 1, and then from 1 to 2, I'll just be hanging out, selling and signing books. I'm going to spend some time Saturday and Sunday at the Avidity Arms booth. Um, and also active self protection. I'm working on spending some time at John Correa's booth there. And then the Armed Citizen Legal Defense Network has a booth that I'll be spending some time at. So, those will all be listed hopefully within the NRA program if you're going to be there. I mean, truly, the book is not published until June 1st, but I'm bringing 150 copies of the book with me to Dallas. You can get a pre publication copy of the book there. I'm happy to sign it for you. If you already bought the book or whatever, I'm happy to just chat with people at the booth, let them know what's going on, and shake hands. And like I said, this is 12 years in the making. This is going to be, for me, a bit of a celebration of triumphing over adversity and getting the book out into the world. So, I look forward to seeing some folks. I will also be in Las Vegas in October for the Liberal Gun Club uh, annual meeting. So hopefully we'll be able to steal away some time and get a drink and a nice meal or something.
Yeah, 100%. I'll definitely see you there. It's a
Cool.
great event. I always say, that event to me, it's funny because it just breaks the stereotype, right? Like if you didn't have that label liberal gun club and you just saw the people and what the people are doing at that event, that like 3 days, whatever the weekend, it's a regular gun thing. You know what I mean? That's what I love about it, right? Like just people just need to understand that we got to get out of the echo chamber and we got to stop with the whole they, them,
Right.
right? Like just we got to evolve. But anyways, I want to thank everybody for tuning in today. I really appreciate you on behalf of our sponsors, on behalf of the Rugers and Arms Corps and Lipsies and Davidsons, everybody that makes this possible, everybody that believes in this mission. Thank you. We need to support our sponsors. They believe in this. To this day, I still freak out. I love that people believe in this. It's like we started this concept in 2018 and it's really grown. It's been fun to watch. Um, but thank you. And we wish you all better mental health and wellness and keep shooting.